We moved into Willow Trace because the street looked like a postcard. Every house had a small garden, not perfect, just personal overgrown roses climbing old trellises, tomato vines spilling out of raised beds, and the huge maple tree in our front yard that made the whole place smell like autumn even in early summer. On our first evening, I watched kids ride their bikes in circles around the cul-de-sac while sprinklers hissed and crickets tuned up for the night. When the sun went down, porch lights flicked on one by one, warm and yellow. It felt safe, lived in, a little messy in a good way. That was before I noticed the HOA sign at the entrance, the one I'd barely glanced at during the tour. Willow Trace Homeowners Association, maintaining the harmony of our community. At the time, it sounded harmless, like background noise you tune out. I didn't understand that harmony here didn't mean peace. It meant control. It meant that every leaf on our street was about to become someone else's property. The first letter appeared in our mailbox 3 days after we moved in. No stamp, no return address, just a crisp white envelope tucked between pizza flyers. Inside was a single sheet with the HOA logo at the top, a willow tree that looked strangely bare, its branches just lines, no leaves. Dear resident, it began, not even using our names. Your current landscaping does not conform to Willow Trace aesthetic standards. Please remove non-approved vegetation within 7 days to avoid fines. I read it twice, then looked at our yard. The only non-approved vegetation I could think of were the lavender bushes by the front steps, the ones my wife, Emily, insisted on bringing from our old house in pots. They weren't wild or overgrown. They were neat, trimmed, and buzzing politely with bees. When I showed her the letter, she laughed in that brittle way she does when she's trying not to show she's scared. It's probably a generic notice, she said. We'll go to the next HOA meeting and sort it out. They can't seriously have a problem with flowers. But when I went back outside that evening, I noticed something I hadn't before. Along the street, every yard had the same square patch of lawn, the same 2 shrubs by the door, the same thin tree planted dead center, like the whole neighborhood had been copy-pasted. The HOA meeting was held in the clubhouse, a low brick building at the end of the street that smelled like coffee and carpet cleaner. Inside, folding chairs faced a long table where 3 board members sat with matching binders. The president, a woman named Mrs. Caldwell, had a smile that never reached her eyes. Behind her, on a projector screen, was a slideshow labeled Q3 Compliance Review. When I brought up the letter about our lavender, she clicked to a slide titled Non-Conforming Flora. Pictures of various yards popped up, each circled in red. Ours was right in the middle, the lavender bushes glowing like a crime scene under the flash. We maintain strict guidelines to protect property values, she said, her voice smooth and practiced. Unauthorized plants attract pests, disrupt visual cohesion, and, frankly, encourage neglect. I tried to argue that the plants were healthy, that they were contained, that they were ours, but every sentence felt like talking into a vacuum. The other residents stared at me with a mix of pity and warning, shaking their heads ever so slightly, like they'd seen this exact scene play out before. You have until Friday, Mrs. Caldwell concluded, closing her binder with a soft thud. After that, the HOA will take action. The room stayed silent long after the projector turned off, as if everyone was waiting to see whether I would obey. Friday came faster than it should have. Life filled the days unpacking boxes, setting up the kids' rooms, learning the creaks of a new house, but the lavender outside became a countdown clock. We talked about digging them up ourselves and replanting them in pots behind the house, somewhere the HOA couldn't see, but each time we tried, Emily froze with the shovel in her hands. My grandmother planted these, she whispered once, fingers brushing the purple flowers. They always come with us. So we gambled. We told ourselves the HOA had bigger problems. Maybe they'd forget, or decide we were harmless. That illusion lasted until 2:07 a.m. Saturday, when a sound like a swarm of electric clippers tore through my sleep. At first I thought it was a dream white noise, some distant lawn service, but then I saw the light. It sliced through the bedroom curtains, white and harsh, accompanied by the low grumble of engines. I got up, heart hammering, and pulled the curtain back just enough to look outside. There, in the middle of the street, were 3 white utility trucks with the Willow Trace logo on the doors. Men in reflective vests and headlamps were fanning out with hedge trimmers and chainsaws, moving from yard to yard like a surgical team. I watched one of them walk up to the Harrisons' house across the street. They had a row of rose bushes along the driveway, tall and tangled, always full of color. Without a word, the worker stepped into the yard and began cutting. Petals and stems flew, roses falling silently onto the concrete like someone had muted the world. No one came outside. No porch lights flicked on. It was as if the whole street had agreed, collectively, to sleep through this. The trucks moved methodically, yard by yard, erasing years of growth in minutes. When they reached our lawn, I finally snapped out of the daze. I ran downstairs and flung the front door open. The night air smelled like gasoline and shredded leaves. "Hey!" I shouted. "You can't just do this without our permission." One of the men glanced at me but didn't stop. He held a laminated sheet in his hand with a list of addresses and photos. Our house was on it, a red X across the lavender. "We have authorization from the HOA," he said flatly. "Non-conforming vegetation removal. You were notified." I stepped between him and the bushes, but another worker gently steered me back. "Sir, please return inside," he said. "It's safer for you that way." Something about the way he said safer made my skin crawl. Behind him, Mrs. Caldwell stood on the sidewalk, hands clasped, watching everything with that practiced smile. By sunrise, Willow Trace looked amputated. Every yard was shaved down to the same dull, regulation shrubs, the same thin, approved trees. Our lavender was gone, uprooted so cleanly that it looked as if it had never grown there at all. Even the big maple tree at the corner lot, one of the few old trees on the street, had been reduced to a raw, jagged stump. When Emily saw the empty space where her plants used to be, she didn't scream. She just sat on the front steps and stared at the soil, her eyes wide and dry, like she'd forgotten how to blink. The kids kept asking why the garden men came at night, why they were allowed to touch other people's yards. I didn't know how to answer without admitting that we'd signed this power away in fine print when we bought the house. A bright new HOA notice was taped to our door: "Compliant. Thank you for your cooperation. Willow Trace is stronger when we grow together." Underneath, in smaller letters, it said, "Reminder, homeowners are not permitted to reintroduce removed plant species. Violations will result in escalated action." That phrase, escalated action, stuck in my head like a splinter. It implied there was something worse than losing our plants. I just didn't know what yet. It started with the smell. 2 nights after the purge, the air in our bedroom turned heavy and damp, like the inside of a greenhouse. I woke up choking on the scent of lavender, stronger than it had ever been when the bushes were alive. For a second I thought I was dreaming about our old house, but then I saw it, faint purple smears along the wall, just above the baseboard, like someone had pressed flower heads into the plaster and dragged them. I flicked on the lamp, but the marks were gone, leaving only clean white paint. Emily mumbled in her sleep and rolled away from the light. I turned it off and lay there listening. The house made its usual settling noises, but beneath them, I heard something else, a soft, wet scratching, like roots threading through soil. The next morning, there were dark spots on the living room ceiling, circular and slightly raised. When I touched one, it felt spongy, almost alive. A crack ran down from it like a thin vein. I told myself it was just water damage. Old houses have problems. But Willow Trace wasn't old. Every home on our street had been built within the last 10 years. There shouldn't have been anything inside these walls except wires, insulation, and the quiet hum of central air. As the days passed, the neighborhood grew unnaturally still. Without the rustle of leaves or the buzzing of bees, the street sounded hollow, as if someone had turned down the volume on the world. Yet inside our house, the opposite was happening. At odd hours, I heard subtle pops and creaks, not from the roof or floorboards, but from inside the walls themselves, as if something were expanding in there, pushing against the drywall. I came home one evening to find fine green threads curling out of the electrical outlets, no thicker than fishing line, winding upward in slow, patient spirals. When I tried to pull one free, it snapped with a tiny wet sound and released a burst of that same overpowering lavender scent. The kids complained that their closets smelled like dirt after rain. Emily found a perfect purple flower pressed between 2 pages of a book she hadn't opened in years. We hadn't put it there. That night, I stared at the stump of the maple at the corner lot on my way home. The cut surface was darkening, not with rot, but with something like ink, spreading in intricate lines that almost looked like writing. As I stepped closer, I saw the pattern spelled out 3 words in the grain: "You cut US." I blinked, and the letters blurred back into random lines. When I turned around, Mrs. Caldwell was watching from her porch, her expression unreadable in the evening light. I confronted her the next morning, fueled by a sleepless night of whispers and phantom petals. "There's something wrong with the houses," I said, not bothering with pleasantries. "With the walls, with the air. Ever since you ripped everything out, it's like the neighborhood is sick." She regarded me for a long moment, then gestured toward the manicured lawns. "Does Willow Trace not look perfect to you?" she asked. "No weeds, no pests, no chaos. This is what people pay for, a controlled environment." I told her about the vines in the outlets, the messages in the wood, expecting at least confusion, maybe concern. Instead, she sighed, as if I'd asked her to explain the weather. "Nature abhors a vacuum," she said softly. "We removed the unregulated growth. It had to go somewhere." She stepped closer, and I noticed faint green stains at the cuffs of her blouse, like grass marks that wouldn't wash out. "The association has learned something over the years," she continued. "If you give plants too much freedom, roots spread under the sidewalks, branches block the lights. Property values drop. People leave. But if you restrict them, if you cut them down to the exact shape you want," her eyes met mine, and for the first time, her smile disappeared. "They learn to grow where you can't reach them. Inside. Downward. Inward." She leaned in so close I could smell the soil on her breath. "You should be grateful, Mr. Weaver. The street is safer now. The danger is contained." That night, the house finally bloomed. The scratching in the walls swelled into a steady, pulsing pressure, like a heartbeat made of wood. Plaster cracked in thin, spiderweb lines, and from every fracture, something green pushed through, delicate at first, then thickening, braiding itself into ropes of stems and leaves. Lavender blossoms erupted from the corners of the ceiling, hanging like purple chandeliers, their scent so strong it felt like drowning. The kids screamed as vines slid out from under their beds, curling gently around their ankles, not hurting, just holding. Emily stood in the hallway, tears running silently down her face, as flowers identical to her grandmother's pressed themselves out of the painted walls, petal by petal. I grabbed a kitchen knife and hacked at the nearest cluster, but each cut released more scent, more sap, more growth. The vines didn't fight back. They didn't need to. Outside, through the window, I could see every house on Willow Trace glowing faintly green from within, like lanterns made of flesh and leaves. The neat, identical lawns remained untouched, pristine and empty, while inside, nature reclaimed the one space the HOA couldn't regulate, us. Later, when the board came by to inspect for damages, they would call it a structural failure, a freak mold bloom, a problem covered by no warranty. But as I stand here now, surrounded by the gardens that forced their way back into existence, I finally understand the slogan on the HOA sign. Willow Trace does maintain harmony by cutting down anything that dares to grow in the open, and letting the roots do their work in the dark where no one can see, until the whole street belongs not to the people who bought the houses, but to whatever has been waiting beneath the foundations all along.